My name is Linda Harris, and I'm 48 years old. For most of my life, I thought I had everything figured out. I had a stable job, a comfortable home in Austin, Texas, and a family that I cherished above all else. My husband, David, and I had been married for over 20 years. We raised two wonderful children, Jake, who's 24, and Emily, who's 22. I thought we were living a normal, happy life, but life has a way of revealing truths that you'd rather not know. My story begins with the sudden death of my father. It was a cold morning when I received the call that changed everything. My father had been in a car accident, and he didn't make it. The news was devastating. My father was my rock, the one who had always been there for me. Losing him felt like losing a part of myself. But what followed his death was something I could never have anticipated. My mother, who was in her late 60s, took my father's death very hard. She was never the same after that day. Not long after, she was diagnosed with terminal cancer. I was crushed. My mother had always been a strong woman, but now she was weakened by grief and illness. She needed me, and I knew I had to be there for her. David, my husband, didn't seem to understand the gravity of the situation. "Can't someone else take care of her?" he asked, as if it were a simple matter. But it wasn't. My brother lived out of state, and there was no one else to care for her. I decided to move back into my family home to take care of my mother during her final days. It was a decision I made without hesitation, but David wasn't pleased. David and I had been living in company housing, a benefit of his job. The rent was affordable, and it was convenient for his work. But my mother needed me, and the only way to care for her properly was to move in with her. I suggested that I could live with my mother for a while, but David was annoyed. "Who's going to cook? Who's going to clean?" he asked, more concerned about his own comfort than my mother's well-being. I tried to explain how important it was for me to be with her, but David's lack of empathy was becoming increasingly apparent. I moved in with my mother, and David grudgingly agreed to stay in the company housing, but it was clear that he was not happy about the arrangement. He didn't visit often, and when he did, his visits were brief and filled with complaints. During those difficult months, I watched my mother slowly fade away. It was heartbreaking to see her in such pain, but I was grateful for the time we had together. She often expressed her gratitude for my presence, unaware of the strain it was putting on my marriage. I did everything I could to make her comfortable, managing her medications, preparing her meals, and simply being there for her. As the months passed, I noticed that David's attitude was becoming more distant. He complained about the inconvenience of the situation, but I was too focused on my mother's care to confront him. I knew that things weren't right between us, but I told myself that once my mother was gone, we would have time to mend our relationship. My mother passed away peacefully in her sleep, just as the doctors had predicted. It was a devastating blow, but I took solace in knowing that I had done everything I could for her. My brother came for the funeral, and so did my children. It was a small, somber affair, and I couldn't help but notice that David and his parents were behaving strangely. During the funeral, David and his parents refused to sit in the family section, choosing instead to sit at the back of the room. I was hurt, but I was too overwhelmed by grief to say anything. After the service, I overheard them making comments about how burdensome it had been to attend. It stung, but I still didn't confront them. I wanted to believe that David was just stressed and that things would return to normal. But things didn't return to normal. After the funeral, I overheard a conversation between David and his parents that left me stunned. They were discussing the possibility of a large inheritance, $7 million, they believed, and how it could change everything for them. I was shocked. Where had they gotten this idea? My parents were not wealthy, and there was no such inheritance. It was at that moment that I began to see David for who he truly was. The man I had spent over 2 decades with, the father of my children, was planning something behind my back. But I didn't yet know the full extent of his betrayal. The $7 million inheritance was just the beginning of a series of events that would tear my family apart and force me to find a strength I didn't know I had. After my mother's funeral, I returned to the family home, feeling an overwhelming sense of emptiness. The house, once filled with memories of love and warmth, now seemed cold and hollow. But I wasn't prepared for what would come next. A few weeks passed, and David suggested that we should take a family trip. He handed me travel vouchers and said it might help me relax after everything I had been through. It seemed like a thoughtful gesture, something I hadn't expected from him given his recent behavior. I was surprised, but I wanted to believe that maybe he was trying to make amends, so I agreed. Before we left, I made a quick stop at Jake's place to visit him and his sister, Emily. I hadn't seen much of them while caring for my mother, and I missed them dearly. We spent some time together, and they were both pleased to see me. They were also surprised by David's suggestion for a trip, but like me, they hoped it was a sign that he was trying to turn things around. The trip itself was peaceful, almost too peaceful. I spent time with my children, soaking in the hot springs and trying to let go of the stress that had been building up over the past few months. But deep down, something felt off. David had stayed behind, saying he needed some time alone, which was unlike him. I tried to push the uneasy feeling aside, telling myself that it was just my nerves playing tricks on me. When the trip was over, I returned home with a renewed sense of hope, ready to face whatever came next. But as soon as I arrived, my heart sank. The family home was gone, wrecked beyond recognition. The place where I had spent so many years with my parents, where I had nursed my mother through her final days, was nothing but a pile of debris. I stood there in shock, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I couldn't understand why this had happened. Then, out of nowhere, David appeared with his parents, all three of them wearing smug expressions. David's words were cold and calculated. "Finally, I'm rid of that burden," he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Starting today, my parents are moving in with me at our house." I could barely process what he was saying. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Have you lost your mind?" But deep down, I knew exactly what was going on. They had wrecked the house, my family home, because they believed there was a $7 million inheritance waiting for them. David had assumed that by destroying the house, he could push me to claim this imaginary fortune and bring it to him. I stood there, feeling an intense mixture of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. I couldn't believe that the man I had shared my life with, the father of my children, had done something so cruel, all for the sake of money that didn't even exist. And the worst part was, David wasn't alone in this. His parents had been part of the plan from the start. They stood there, waiting for me to hand over the inheritance, but there was nothing to give. I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing. It was the kind of laughter that comes from utter disbelief, from the realization that everything you thought you knew was a lie. "There's no inheritance," I finally managed to say through my laughter. "You wrecked the house for nothing. There's nothing left." Their smug expressions quickly turned to confusion, then anger. "What do you mean, no inheritance?" David demanded, his face turning red. But I didn't answer him. I was done explaining myself. The truth was out, and there was nothing more to say. I walked away from the wreckage, leaving David and his parents to stand in the mess they had created. The house might have been gone, but I wasn't about to let them walk away from this unscathed. They had destroyed my home, my memories, and in return, I was going to take something from them. I immediately sought legal advice. The house had still been in my mother's name, and David and his father had no right to do what they did. As it turned out, They had used David's father's connections in the construction industry to carry out the wreckage themselves, without any legal permission. They had even given me those travel vouchers to ensure I was out of the way while they carried out their plan. It was clear to me that they had gone too far, and I was determined to make them pay for what they had done. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for my parents, for the memories they had left behind, and for the dignity that David and his family had tried to strip away from me. The battle was far from over, and I was ready to see it through to the end. When I walked away from the wreckage of my family home, I knew there was no turning back. The love I once felt for David was replaced with a resolve to fight for what was right. I couldn't allow him or his parents to get away with what they had done, not after they had destroyed everything I held dear, all for a non-existent $7 million inheritance. I met with a lawyer the very next day. As I explained the situation to him, he listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When I told him about how David and his father had wrecked the house without any legal permission, his face hardened. "This is a clear case of property destruction, Linda," he said. "Not only can we hold them accountable for the damages, but we can also pursue compensation for the emotional distress this has caused you." Hearing those words gave me a sense of relief I hadn't felt in months. Finally, someone was on my side, someone who believed in my fight for justice. My lawyer moved quickly, filing a formal complaint against David and his father. They had crossed a line, and now they would have to face the consequences. A few days later, David received the legal notice. I wasn't there to see his reaction, but I got a taste of it soon enough when he called me, his voice filled with anger. "What's with this certified letter?" he shouted. "You're seriously going to sue me? We're family, Linda. This isn't how families treat each other." I couldn't believe his audacity. "Family?" I shot back. "Is that what you call what you did to me? Destroying my mother's house, thinking you'd get your hands on millions that don't even exist? You should be grateful I'm only suing you for damages. You have no idea how much you've hurt me." There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought I had gotten through to him. But then he started making excuses, blaming everything on his father. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said, his tone shifting to something that almost sounded like regret. "Dad thought it was the best way to get things settled. I just went along with it." I wasn't buying it. "You went along with it because you were greedy, David. You didn't care about me, or my family, or anything other than that imaginary money. Well, guess what? There's nothing to settle. You and your father are going to pay for what you did." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. I was done being the understanding wife. I was done letting David and his family walk all over me. I had spent too long putting everyone else's needs before my own, and now it was time to take care of myself. As the legal process unfolded, I discovered something even more shocking. Emily, my daughter, came to me one evening with her phone in hand. "Mom, you need to see this," she said, her voice trembling with anger. She showed me a listing on a popular online marketplace. There, in full view, were my mother's belongings, her cherished possessions, the ones that had survived the wreckage of the house. My heart sank as I realized what this meant. "Who's selling these?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's Grandma," Emily said, her face pale. "She's selling everything that was left from the house. Dad must have given her access, and now she's just selling them like they're junk." I felt sick to my stomach. It wasn't enough for them to destroy the house. Now they were profiting off my mother's memories. I knew I had to act fast. I called the police, reporting the theft of my mother's belongings. My lawyer assured me that we could pursue charges for the theft as well, adding to the already mounting case against David and his family. The investigation moved quickly. David's mother's account on the marketplace was shut down, and the items were pulled from sale. I was able to recover most of what she had listed, but the damage was done. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have ever imagined. These were the people I had once called family, and now they were little more than strangers who had taken everything from me. As if this wasn't enough, the final blow came when David's father was diagnosed with terminal cancer. I found out when David called me, his voice frantic and desperate. "Dad's dying, Linda. What am I supposed to do?" I was stunned by the news, but I couldn't find it in me to feel sympathy. The man who had wrecked my life was now facing his own mortality, and instead of feeling sad, I felt a strange sense of justice. "I don't know, David. Maybe you should reflect on how you treated my parents when they were sick. Maybe you'll find some answers there." David didn't say much after that. His father's death came quickly, and with it, the final unraveling of everything they had tried to build. In his will, David's father left his house to Jake, my son, an ironic twist, considering everything that had happened. Jake, determined not to let history repeat itself, decided to have the house demolished, just as David had done to my family home. The wreckage of that house felt like the closing of a chapter, one that had been filled with pain, but also with a newfound strength I never knew I had. David and his mother were left with nothing, no house, no money, and no family to support them. And as much as I wanted to feel sorry for them, I couldn't. They had made their choices, and now they were living with the consequences. I, on the other hand, was ready to start anew, leaving the past behind and focusing on the future that lay ahead. In the weeks following David's father's death and the demolition of his house, I began to see everything in a new light. The destruction of my family home, the betrayal by my husband, and the theft of my mother's belongings had all taken a toll on me, but they had also revealed something important: my own strength. I had survived the worst of it, and now it was time to move forward. Jake, who had inherited his grandfather's house, made a decision that surprised me. "Mom," he said one day, "I'm going to build a new house on the land where Grandpa's house stood. I want you to come live with us when it's ready. You don't have to be alone anymore." His offer filled me with warmth. I had been living with Emily while everything was being sorted out, and as much as I loved my daughter, I knew I couldn't stay with her forever. Jake's fiancée was supportive of the idea, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had a place where I truly belonged. I agreed to move in with Jake once the house was built. It was a fresh start, a chance to rebuild not just a home, but a life that had been shattered by greed and betrayal. I was determined not to become the kind of mother-in-law that David's mother had been. Instead, I wanted to be a source of support and love for my son and his future wife. As for David and his mother, they had fallen on hard times. With no house and no savings, they were forced to move into a small company-owned apartment. I heard from mutual acquaintances that they were struggling, but I felt no desire to reach out. They had made their choices, and now they had to live with the consequences. The irony wasn't lost on me. David and his mother were now in the very position they had tried so hard to avoid by wrecking my family home. Meanwhile, I finalized the legal matters. David finally paid the damages and compensation from what little he had left of the inherited assets. The money didn't matter to me as much as the principle. It was a final act of accountability, something that had been missing for far too long. As I settled into life with Emily and awaited the completion of Jake's new house, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The $7 million inheritance that David and his parents had been so obsessed with had never existed, but the cost of their greed had been very real. They had lost everything: house, family, dignity, while I had gained something far more valuable, a new sense of purpose and a chance to start over. When Jake's house was finally completed, I moved in with him and his fiancée. The house was beautiful, filled with light and warmth, a stark contrast to the darkness that had clouded my life before. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I also knew that I was no longer alone. I had my children, my new home, and the knowledge that I had stood up for myself when it mattered most. In the end, the past was behind me, and a new chapter was just beginning. And this time, it was one I was writing on my own terms.